This is part 85 of my series on my Engage Model Railway project. Previous parts covered the project from its inception, through the creation of the baseboard, selection and laying of track, building of scenic items, obtaining rolling stock, etc. The project is ongoing. This part deals with a bunch more stuff, chiefly freight rolling stock that I picked up from a local seller contacted via Kijiji marketplace, and also with a rather nice Graham Farish Southern N-class locomotive which I bought from Rails of Sheffield. There will be some running video of the N-class paired with some appropriate items from the new rolling stock during the video. I had got into contact with this particular Kijiji seller last year via an ad they placed on Kijiji Marketplace for local sales. I bought a whole bunch of stuff from them at that time. Then they contacted me again recently to say that they still had a lot more British Engage stuff for sale, but they had completed the sale of the house I had visited before, so the stuff would only be available at that location for a few more days. So I arranged to make another visit with suitable arrangements for social distancing, masks, etc., given the current situation. The location was around 1.5 to 2 hours drive from my home here in Ontario, Canada. I made the drive on a cold, rainy Saturday morning with some ice mixed in with the rain from time to time, but the drive went basically without incident, and I arrived a little early for my appointment. They certainly weren't exaggerating when they said there was still a lot of stuff left for sale. There must have been close to 1,000 British Engage wagons, and British Engage was only part of it. There was lots of European and American N-scale and HO, plus quite a bit of track, accessories, etc., also many books. For some reason, the original collector of all this, the father of the lady I spoke with, had focused mainly on freight wagons in British Engage. I had picked up a few passenger coaches on my first visit, and there were no more that interested me this time, a few, but they were all British Railways, and I don't do BR as I'm modelling pre-war operations. There were also 4 small BR locos and 1 National Coal Board loco, which also didn't fit my prototype. I did buy 5 locos on my first visit, and when I mentioned that a couple of those didn't work and were beyond my skills to fix, the seller was kind enough to credit me for what I paid for those locos. In general, they were extremely kind to me. I bought many more wagons, but they generously gave me a whole box full of interesting books and some other odds and ends. I'm not going to go through all of this purchase in detail in this video. I'll get it all onto the layout bit by bit in future videos, but I will just cover an overview of what I bought before turning to the very nice locomotive that arrived in the post from Rails of Sheffield this week. So here's the box of books I got. I chose these as all being very much in my area of interest, pre-nationalisation operations, especially in the British Midlands. I grew up in Leicester, and my dad's dad worked for the LMS, and before that for the Midland Railway. Here you can see the books spread out a bit. Some very interesting stuff, a survey of selected LMS stations, pictorial history of railways in the Midlands, a couple of good general histories, and stuff on the LMS and its constituent companies, joint lines, other lines in the Midlands, and a couple of books more on southern subjects. It's hard to photograph the books without getting some reflection off the covers. Hopefully this picture shows better what isn't clear in the preceding picture. Here are the accessory items that I picked up. Not too much in this area really, but a couple of things that should come in useful. A lot of furniture containers, LMS and GWR, some fencing with stiles and gates, a few coal loads, 1 set of pre-painted loco crew, some white metal barrels and more bicycles, a partially complete curved viaduct kit, and some small chimneys and 1 large chimney. I shall have to see how some of this might usefully be employed on the layout. I focused somewhat more on company wagons this time as opposed to private owner wagons, though I did pick up quite a few private owner wagons as well. In this picture are all of the company wagons that I picked up. Southern at left, then NE, i.e. LNER, centre left, then LMS centre right, and GWR at the right. And there's 3 LSW, London and South Western Railway wagons at the back. Quite a mixture here. Some parcels vans, a couple of GWR siphons, additional brake vans for every company except the GWR, an Engage Society Stove R in LMS livery, various boxcars, cattle wagons, bolster wagons, open wagons, etc. Here are the private owner wagons that I picked up. Something of a focus on tank wagons, the two right-hand columns are all tank wagons, and various other interesting things, chiefly open wagons, some with coke rails, also containers on conflats for Lions Tea and rally cycles. So I guess the two right-hand columns aren't all tank wagons, but they're mostly tank wagons. Here are the same wagons photographed without flash, less glare but also less sharply in focus. As I say, we'll see these on the layout in future videos. For now, let's turn to the new loco that I received in the post this week. I found it difficult to photograph in its packaging, as the style of packaging obscured the details of the loco, and the camera really wouldn't pick up on it, but I left this picture in as source evidence. It's expertly weathered by the model centre, but I didn't buy it from the model centre, but I bought it as a used item from Rails of Sheffield, who I've found a very useful supplier. They stock a lot of interesting things, they're interesting to me anyway, and they're always ready to ship to me in Canada. Even with the plastic inner container taken out of the box, I still found it impossible to get my camera to focus on this properly. This is a style of inner packaging I hadn't encountered from Farish before, with the loco trapped between two moulded layers, rather than the current style where the clear inner packaging folds around the top, bottom, front and back of the loco. Finally, with the top layer of the clear inner packaging removed, something of the detail of the loco can be seen. And here it is finally on the tracks, and now that you can see it properly, it looks very handsome indeed. This is an N-class loco in Southern Railway's olive green livery. The N-class of Mogul 260 locos was designed by Richard Maunsell, originally for mixed traffic duties on the South Eastern and Chatham Railway, then passing on to the Southern Railway upon amalgamation in 1923. The design was completed in 1914, but as a result of the Great War, production was delayed, and the first locos of the type entered service in 1917. They continued to be built right up until 1934, so well after amalgamation. So far as I know, only one of the class is preserved on the Midhants Watercress Railway. Here's a view somewhat from the back of the loco. As you may see, this is quite a detailed model, with separately fitted handrails, etc., metal safety valves. The cab is also quite detailed. I was a little surprised by the white painting of the interior sides of the cab, but I assume this must be prototypical, as it seems to have been done very neatly and deliberately. Although it's hard to see how they'd actually stay that white in operation. The tender is also very nicely done, with separately fitted parts and a good-looking coal load. On the front of the loco is a disc code, as would be typical for a loco in SR Southern Railway's operation. This model, as previously noted, has been professionally weathered by the model centre. I'm definitely thinking of doing some more weathering on some of my locos myself at some point, but I'm still in two minds as to exactly the details of how to go about it. In this case, the weathering seems to be largely in the form of adhered powder, creating effects of rust and dirt. Definitely more realistic for operational conditions than completely clean paintwork, rods, wheels, etc. Since I wasn't sure what the history of this loco was, although it was sold as used, I decided to give it a bit of running in. It didn't actually run too well at first. It started off okay, but it seemed to get stuck every time it tried to go across a set of points, unless I ran it at very high speed. I had it on the bench in the servicing cradle, and found that the wheels were quite filthy. Perhaps they hadn't been cleaned since the weathering was done. In any case, I cleaned the rims of all the driving wheels, and also of the tender wheels, since those also have pickups. The power from the tender pickups is passed to the engine via sprung wires in the tender drawbar. I've found this arrangement in Farish locos sometimes a bit iffy, but it seemed to be working okay in this case when I tested it on the bench. The loco ran much better when I got it back on the rails after cleaning the wheels. Here's some video of the loco running in. Once the loco was run in a bit, I determined to hook it up with a train, and chose some suitable items from amongst my newly acquired rolling stock. Southern Railway items can be seen at the left here. I coupled the loco, the N-class, up with 3 Daypole Southern parcels wagons that I picked up, and then behind that I coupled 2 Farish and 4 Pico Southern cattle wagons, and a Farish Southern brake van to bring up the rear of the train. Here's the front of that train with the 3 Daypole parcels vans. And here's the rest of the train with 2 Farish and 4 Pico cattle wagons and the Farish brake van. I was pleasantly surprised to find that this train, with its mixture of items from different manufacturers, coupled and ran well. It can often be a rather iffy proposition trying to combine stock from different makers coupled with rapido couplings. But in this case it worked largely okay. I did have one instance of the Pico cattle wagons coming uncoupled from the Farish wagons as they went up the incline. This Farish model of the N-class has traction tyres on the rear pair of driving wheels, which doubtless helped it in pulling this train up the gradient, which it did okay, with just a little slowing down. Here's a close-up of one of the Daypole parcels vans. And here's a close-up of one of the Pico cattle wagons. By comparison, here's one of the Farish cattle wagons. In this case, I think the Farish items seem rather nicer, although they are perhaps a bit too shiny. Here's the Farish brake van. It's difficult to persuade my little Olympus camera to focus for this kind of close-up. I could basically only get these wagon close-ups by using the super macro mode, but then flash can't be used, so it's hard to hold the camera still enough to avoid blurring. I'm quite happy with this brake van on the whole. Now let's see a bit of running video of the N-class with this train. Labour a little bit getting that train up there because it's a fairly heavy train. When I reviewed the pictures and videos I had shot so far for this episode, I realised that it appeared the loco had probably originally had 2 discs on the front, with the one from the top bracket being missing. You can see there's little white flecks on the top bracket at the top of the smoke box. I thought that the disc had perhaps come off inside the packaging, so I went back, took the box out of its sleeve and opened the interior packing looking for the potential missing disc. Initially I didn't find anything. There was nothing rattling around loose inside the packaging. But then as I was about to give up, I noticed that I could see a little disc through the bottom of the transparent inner packaging. I couldn't quite figure out where it was, as there didn't seem to be any additional layer of packaging that could be separated. It turned out that the disc that had become detached had been taped to the bottom of the interior transparent packaging using transparent tape. Presumably this must have been done either by Rails of Sheffield or by the original owner of this model. Anyway, having located the detached disc. I freed it from its tape, got the loco back on the bench, and reattached it to the bracket on the loco. This was actually a lot easier said than done. Holding such a small item and gluing it into place on the tiny bracket is very tricky. On my first attempt I held the disc in tweezers, but I had great difficulty getting the CA glue to bind it to the bracket, and then it popped out of the tweezers, and I thought all was lost, as finding something as tiny as that on my cluttered bench can be next to impossible. But after 10 minutes or so of searching, I did find the disc, and for my next attempt I abandoned the tweezers as too dangerous, and went with the technique I previously developed of moistening a Q-tip and pressing it onto the disc to get it to adhere to the Q-tip. This was a bit challenging with this disc, as it was made of metal and quite heavy for its size, but by wetting the Q-tip a bit more and pressing quite hard, I was able to get it to stick to the Q-tip, and then I could place it on the bracket. The advantage of the Q-tip technique is if the item falls off, it just drops down. It doesn't fly away the way it does when it pops out of tweezers. Anyway, as you may see, I did finally manage to get the errant disc glued back onto its bracket. And here's the N-Class back on the tracks with its train, now with 2 discs on the front, although I guess the gluing of the top disc has messed up the weathering on the top of the smoke box a bit, so perhaps I need to try and dust over that a bit. Anyway, to finish up, just a little bit more running video with the replaced disc in place.